With the real estate market being so hot, a lot of people may be wondering, why do I need to pay 6% of the sales price of my home to a realtor? I mean, how hard can it be to sell a home? To give an unbiased analogy, it's kind of like whether or not to cook at home or go to a restaurant. I don't think anybody disputes the fact that in general, it's more expensive to go out to eat at a restaurant. But in some cases, what you want to eat may require a whole bunch of specialized tools, or maybe just having a really busy, stressful day, and it's just worth it to you to pay that premium price and go to a restaurant. Same is true with real estate. Obviously, you're going to be saving money if you don't go with the realtor, but is it worth your time? Finance is about personal preferences, personal choice. So I'm not necessarily here to tell you what is the right answer or wrong answer. I'm here to basically give you the pros and cons and also walk you through the steps on if you do choose to sell your home without a realtor, what that process may be like. So that way, ultimately, you can decide whether or not you want to sell your own home or go with a realtor. Now, I feel the first question to start with that most people end up having is whether or not it's legal to sell a home without a realtor. And the simple answer to this is yes, depending on your state. Many people usually incorrectly believe that you need a realtor to sell a home because they often hear from other people, especially realtors, that you need someone to properly fill out certain forms as well as make sure that the closing process runs smoothly. And while that is true, you don't necessarily need a realtor to do that. And on top of that, there's not necessarily a federal law that mandates that a realtor must be involved in the closing process of a home. The reality is you could hire a real estate attorney because these people really understand real estate law. Even in most cases, they understand it a lot better than a realtor. A realtor obviously knows some general knowledge of real estate law, but not to the same level as a real estate attorney. I kind of look at it the same way as a salesperson for a car versus somebody that's a mechanic or a technician for a car. They're going to know a lot about cars, but in very different ways. So a real estate attorney can make sure that you fill out the proper paperwork to make sure that the closing process runs smoothly. And there are other companies out there as well that will make sure that there's not necessarily tax liens on the home you're actually buying, so that way you don't have any headaches after you actually end up buying the home. I like to put it this way: a realtor's primary objective is to make sure that you're selling your home for top dollar, versus a real estate attorney, his primary objective is to make sure that you know your rights regarding real estate and that you're protected. They are accomplishing different goals, and that's why in some cases some people actually end up hiring both. And some people will be quick to point out that a realtor does have some general knowledge regarding real estate law, but you could kind of make that same argument the other way, that a real estate attorney probably has some general knowledge on how to make sure you're selling your home for top dollar. At the end of the day, you wouldn't take that advice very heavily, you just take it with a grain of salt. The same is true with the realtor. They're not necessarily giving real legal advice, they're giving general input on what they know regarding real estate law, but it's not necessarily professional legal advice. And as I said before, every single state varies in terms of their actual rules regarding selling real estate, but at the end of the day, I highly recommend considering getting a real estate attorney versus actually getting a realtor if you decide to sell your own home. Now, I'm going to give a general outline on how to sell a home without a realtor, and the very first step is just make sure you do the thorough amount of research required, so that way you don't have any kind of surprises down the road, which is obviously what you're doing by watching this video. The next step I would suggest is, you could either go find a real estate attorney first, or you can try to find out the actual value for your home. And I'm going to explain that in a second. But the reason I would figure out what the value of your home is first is because that might dictate whether or not you end up wanting to sell the home on your own or not. You may be thinking it's going to be worth $300,000 and that 6% is going to be a significant amount. So it may actually be worth selling your home on your own, but it could end up turning out that your home is only worth $150,000 and that 6% isn't necessarily so significant to you. So that's why I would start with that before actually going with the real estate attorney first. Now, regarding making sure you price your home correctly, obviously it's critical that you do this properly, because the whole reason you're trying to sell your home on your own without a realtor is so that you can avoid paying that 6% commission and you're saving that money. But if you're leaving money on the table because you ended up undervaluing your home, then it doesn't really do you much good, right? You end up saving the 6% on the commission, but maybe you ended up pricing your home 8% too low. So that can end up costing you. On the other hand, if you end up overpricing your home, you could end up having your home sit on the market too long for too many months that you end up losing all your leverage during the negotiation process and end up getting a lowball offer. And on top of that, a lot of people end up desperate when their home has sat on the market for so long that they end up going with a realtor anyways. So now you kind of lost twice, because now you've lost leverage in terms of the negotiation process and you're still ending up paying that fee to that realtor anyways. So that's definitely a consideration a real risk that you want to realize. So what I recommend for everybody is to calculate the value of their home, which I'll touch on in a second, minus the actual commission fees you would end up paying. So let's say I have a $200,000 home that I'm going to end up paying 6% commission. So I'm going to end up netting $188,000 on that home. Now, realistically, what do I think I could sell that home on my own for? Maybe I think I could hit $195,000, but you have to consider and back off all the real estate attorney fees you may end up paying, any other transactions transaction fees, as well as any professional marketing material you may end up wanting. If you do that yourself, great. But if you end up paying somebody, all these fees and costs end up costing you, let's just say $5,000. So that $195,000 sales price, now I'm backing off the $5,000 worth of expense that's on my pocket versus had it been on the realtor side. And now I end up netting $190,000. So I end up better off $2,000, but now you have to decide whether or not that $2,000 is actually worth their time and that stress. For some people, saving $2,000 is really hard to do, and that's a lot of money and worth it. Some people are fortunate enough to make that in a day, great for them, and then it's not worth it. Now, as far as actually knowing what your home is worth and valuing it correctly, the very first step is basically figuring out homes that have sold in your area that are similar in type and size. But unfortunately, a lot of people just kind of end up stopping here, and that's the very first thing and the only thing they do to price their home. But this is a very important step. You can find the sales price of homes in your area either by going down to your local municipality building, or sometimes they have that information online, or even in some cases you can find this information on county tax records. They end up having the sales price of every home that's been sold, not just necessarily the homes that have been sold on MLS. And on top of that, you could use Zillow. Sometimes that's accurate sales information in your area. Sometimes it's not necessarily accurate. So that's something you want to really make sure if you're going to end up just basing your sales price of your home solely on Zillow. Make sure it's actually accurate. But here's where the problems begin with just using the sales price of comps in your area. You don't necessarily know if homes have sold for $200,000 in your area, but the seller had to throw in $10,000 worth of incentives to do so. They ended up throwing in new appliances. They may have spent a ton of money just replacing the roof just to get that home on the market. Or you could end up having another situation where a home sold for $200,000, but the person didn't even clean their home. There's trash everywhere, and they ended up still getting that $200,000. Those are very different scenarios that end up impacting how you're actually going to accurately price your home. Some people may suggest hiring an appraiser, and that certainly is an option, but you may be thinking to yourself, well, why am I paying all these fees for the real estate attorney and now the appraiser, when the whole reason I didn't want to go with the realtor was to save that money? That's certainly a fair argument to be made. And you could also make the argument too, you could have 10 different appraisers come in and appraise a house, and they could end up having vastly different offers or valued amounts for that home. An appraiser's main business usually is letting banks know that the loan that they're about to make on a home, that the value of that home actually matches or is worth that loan. They're not necessarily there to make sure that you're not necessarily leaving money on the table of the sales price of a home. That's a huge word of caution, whether or not you end up going with appraiser or using the sales price of comps in your area to figure out the list price of your home. The reality is, if you're in a hot market or even a falling market that's falling or rising rapidly, the available information may not necessarily have caught up yet. In January, homes may have listed for $100,000, but in February, people are making offers on those same homes for $125,000 because the market is just that hot. So March 1st comes around and you end up basically using January's sales price or list price for listing your own home. So you price it at, let's say, $105,000. The reality is you left money on the table because you could have priced it at $125,000 or even higher, depending on how hot your market is. This is an area where a realtor actually does have a little bit of an advantage in terms of figuring out an accurate list price for your home, but you could actually do a little bit of this work yourself as well. You could go to open houses in your local area, see if there's huge demand for these homes, or are there only like one person showing up for the full open house? Are homes being listed only for a few days, or are they being listed for a few months at a time? On top of that, there's probably somebody you feel comfortable asking in your local area that recently sold their home. Ask them, did you happen to get above or below your list price? Did you end up having to do any major expenses to get the home ready to be sold? Did you have to replace the roof? Did you end up keeping the appliances? Those are questions you may be comfortable asking, perhaps not, but that can end up giving a better picture and answering these issues in terms of just using the sales price of comps in your area. That's not necessarily completely accurate. If you can get these questions answered, then you can get a better accurate picture. Now, there are people that have been known to contact local realtors in their area that are willing to give a free consultation for their home and have this realtor basically tour the home, say what they should upgrade, what they shouldn't, and what probably is a good estimated list price and what they could probably get for their home. Not necessarily something I would recommend, not something I would do myself because it's a little bit unethical to do, but there are people that have been known to do this. Now, the next step after you figure out an accurate sales price of your home is to contact a real estate attorney. And this can range anywhere from $300 all the way to $1,000, depending on how many hours of service you end up needing. But this is still definitely $1,000 less than the 6% or 7% commission fee you end up paying. And this isn't necessarily an area you want to skimp out on either. They're giving real legal advice and telling you and walking you through the process of how to properly fill out certain forms. You also want to contact a local title or escrow company in your area, and usually they have a for sale by owner package that has all the necessary offer or disclosure forms that are required in your area. You want to make sure you do your homework and know what's actually required because it varies state by state. And you want to have all this paperwork and all the legal advice done before you actually list your home and put it out on the market. Now, the next step in the process is cleaning the house and getting it ready to be sold. And there's two things you want to keep in mind here. The first being is you don't necessarily have the realtor to rely on what you should actually upgrade and what you shouldn't. In some cases, you're going to get that return on your money 100% by replacing the carpet if it's worn out and just totally ugly. In some cases, it's not worth doing the labor and spending the money on repainting a wall because the new owner is going to paint it whatever they want anyway, so it's not necessarily worth the investment to do so. The second thing to keep in mind is that any upgrades and the cleaner you make your home, the easier it is going to be to sell the home on your own. So it may not necessarily be 100% worth it to replace the carpet. You're only going to get 90% return on that money, but because it's that much easier to sell your home, then it actually ends up being worth it. So that's something you want to consider as well. Now, next step is making sure you have professional looking marketing material because those photos are key in getting the buyers to your home and generating those offers. You may end up hiring a professional photographer. That may be worth it in some cases, or you may know somebody with a professional camera that they may be willing to let you borrow for a day or so, or you may have a really high-end cell phone that might actually take really nice photos. Some iPhones are able to do that, but regardless is you want to make sure you have good lighting and as well as good angles. So Google out there the best way to take pictures of real estate photography because it's not necessarily as simple as you may think. And then you're going to have a professional description for your home, and you can actually look at homes in your local area that are being sold by realtors and see the keywords that they're using and include it on your own. And then you want to make sure you post that home every single place you can, whether it be Trulia, Zillow, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. Those are great options that are still used today. You may want to consider going with the flat fee MLS, multiple listing service. There are actually real estate companies out there that have realtors, but you can actually go to that company and say, I don't necessarily want to market with a realtor. I just want you guys to handle the MLS aspect of it. Then this is an optional piece, but it's to hold open houses. You may be showing her your home already and you may not necessarily need an open house, but if you do an open house, make sure the marketing material looks professional. Don't just write on a piece of cardboard or piece of paper that you have an open house and it's written in Sharpie. That's not necessarily the best image for your home. Make sure it looks professional if you're going to hold an open house. Now, hopefully by this point, you're actually getting offers on your home. And one of the things that's really key about the negotiation process is that the buyer knows that you're selling the home on your own. So you're not necessarily paying those realtor fees. So they're probably going to be a lot tougher on that negotiation process because they know that there's a little bit more wiggle room. Plus, on top of that, the buyer may actually be on the hook for their realtor that's representing them. Remember, you're not necessarily obligated at all to pay the realtor if they're not representing you or if they're not necessarily working as a middleman. If you're selling the home on your own, you're under no obligation to pay that realtor fee. That being said, realtors talk, and if you're not necessarily cooperative with realtors in your area, realtors basically have no incentive to go show a home that's for sale by owner. The only times that sometimes realtors will is if there's not necessarily a huge supply of homes in that area, or if it's just such a great deal that the buyer's just that interested in it. And then once you have that finalized offer, you're gonna wanna have your real estate attorney review that, make sure that everything has been done properly. It may be the case that the buyer has sent over an inspector during the negotiation process. That would have already happened. On top of that, the buyer's bank may have already sent an appraiser to come appraise the home. But then at the end of the day, if that all sounds worth it to you and you want to tackle the task of selling a home without a realtor, that's good for you. Props to you. You're going to end up saving that 6% that can end up being thousands of dollars. That's the general process. Remember, your real estate attorney is going to be basically your best friend for the process. They are going to be representing you, making sure that everything's protected and that you know and understand your rights. Now, I do just want to briefly cover some of the pros and cons on selling a home without a realtor. Some of the pros would be, obviously, you're saving that 6% on the sales price of the home. Another potential pro is that there's more transparency during the process. When you're working with a realtor, you don't necessarily know how the negotiation process, what things are actually being said by that realtor. You have an assumption because you told them what to say, but you don't necessarily know. And so if transparency is something you care about, then it may actually be a better option to sell a home on your own. Now, another major pro is that you have more control over the sales process of your home. When you're working with a realtor, it can kind of be a little bit tense on times where the realtor wants to show the home at a time that's not necessarily convenient for you, but you feel pretty obligated because, you know, they're the realtor working on selling your home. You feel obligated to kind of cooperate with them, versus if you're selling the home yourself, then you basically are in full control when you hold open houses, when you tour the home for different people. Another potential pro as well is that you may actually generate more buyers that are interested because they know that there's a little bit more wiggle room on that price because you're not necessarily on the hook for that 6% commission. Now, some of the cons in terms of selling the home on your own without a realtor, one of them is actually, ironically, is that sometimes you won't have as many buyers because a realtor that's representing a buyer doesn't necessarily have an incentive to come show that home, especially if there's two homes that are offering $200,000 for the list price of their home. Why would the realtor go show the $200,000 home that's for sale by owner? They'd rather sell the home where they know they're going to have the commission. You know, there are realtors out there that basically will say that I won't show any home to a buyer that's for sale by owner unless if it's just that great of a deal and they ask for it, or there's just not necessarily any homes that match the buyer's request. Now, another major con is obviously the risk of underselling your home. If you're not necessarily getting the full value, that obviously is the major drawback. Another potential con is that you're not necessarily having a realtor being able to schedule different appointments. They're not necessarily screening those calls, making sure that these are actually real, serious buyers. You're going to have to do that and basically be on the hook for scheduling all those appointments. Now, last potential con is that you're more emotionally attached to that home when you're actually selling it. If you're showing a home to somebody and they end up saying how the decor just looks ridiculous and stupid, then that may end up affecting the negotiation process, versus if you had a realtor show the home for you, they're not necessarily going to be offended by that comment. But at the end of the day, I mean, selling a home is always an emotional process for anybody. So that negotiation process, if you can take that emotion out of it, whether or not you sell with a realtor or sell on your own, it's going to be a huge advantage to you. Now, I did plan on covering some tips on how to get top dollar on the sales price of your home for sale by owner home, but this video obviously has run a bit long, so I'm going to cut it short. But I will make that future video, so subscribe to stay tuned for that. If you gain any value at all out of this video, please give this video a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it a lot. This obviously was a bit to cover and took a lot of time. And as always, if you like personal finance, real estate, or business type videos, please consider subscribing. And as always, I hope to see you in the next one.